I am Camille, 33 years old and a forensic accountant. 200 guests stared at me as my wedding march played to an empty aisle. My fiancé Derek was nowhere to be found. Instead, his mother Beatrice marched up the altar steps, grabbed my imported lace veil, and ripped it violently from my hair. Before I could process the sudden pain of the bobby pins tearing at my scalp, she raised a massive crystal goblet of red wine and splashed it directly across my white silk bodice. "You were just a placeholder." She laughed so loudly the acoustics of the cathedral carried her cruelty to every single pew. "My son is at the Four Seasons Hotel right now, marrying a senator's daughter. You really thought a foster kid could buy her way into this family?" As I stood there dripping in cheap merlot, a deep voice echoed from the heavy oak doors at the back of the church. "Do not break." Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled her entire bloodline, brick by brick, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against people who thought you were weak and disposable. Growing up in the foster care system taught me to read people, and more importantly, it taught me to read numbers. Numbers never lie even when people do. I had spent the last 5 years working grueling hours at a top-tier financial firm specializing in forensic accounting. I track missing assets, uncover corporate embezzlement, and find the truth hidden in spreadsheets. Derek and I met at a networking event 3 years ago. He was a mid-level manager at the Harrison Venture Capital Group. He was charming, attentive, and constantly asking for my professional opinion on his work. I thought we were building a partnership. I thought we were building a life together. I practically rewrote his entire portfolio doing his financial modeling late at night so he could secure his promotions. I paid for the down payment on our shared apartment, and I funded 70% of this lavish wedding because Beatrice insisted her family needed to maintain an image of high society wealth. Standing at the altar, the cold wine soaking through my dress to my skin, the reality of the situation crystallized in my mind. Beatrice stood before me, vibrating with arrogant triumph. She wore an emerald green gown that probably cost more than my first car, and her face was twisted into a sneer of pure malicious joy. She turned to the crowd of well-dressed guests, throwing her arms wide. "Look at her," she announced to the whispering audience. "Did you really think my Derek would settle for a girl with no pedigree and no family name? He used you to do his homework, Camille. The senator has provided a dowry of influence and real estate. You have provided nothing but a temporary distraction. Please gather your things and leave through the side door before you embarrass yourself further." The silence in the cathedral was suffocating. I looked out at the sea of faces. Dirk's relatives were smirking, whispering behind their expensive ceremony programs. In the third pew, I made eye contact with Monique. She was the wife of Dirk's older brother and a highly successful luxury real estate broker. As a sharp and observant African-American woman who had fought tooth and nail for her own success, Monique had always seen right through Beatrice's fake aristocratic facade. Unlike the rest of the family, Monique was not smiling. She sat perfectly still, her arms crossed, shaking her head in utter disgust. She gave me a single knowing look that said she was entirely done with this toxic family. I did not cry. My forensic brain kicked in, shutting down my emotional responses and cataloging the liabilities. I had just lost a 3-year relationship and tens of thousands of dollars on a canceled reception. I took a slow breath, preparing to calmly step down from the altar and walk out with my dignity intact. That was when the heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral swung completely open. The bright afternoon sunlight flooded the center aisle, casting a long, imposing shadow. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed against the marble floor. The whispering in the pews abruptly stopped. People turned in their seats, and I heard a collective gasp ripple through the crowd of Dirk's corporate friends. Walking down the aisle was Zane Harrison. He was 35 years old, a self-made billionaire, and the ruthless chief executive officer of the firm where Derek worked. Zane was a legend in the financial district, known for his absolute lack of mercy toward incompetence and his terrifying intellect. He was dressed in a pristine charcoal bespoke suit, his dark eyes locked entirely on me. He completely ignored the 200 guests parting the sea of people with his sheer presence. Beatrice lost her confident sneer. Her face went pale as she recognized the man who held her son's entire career in the palm of his hand. "Mr. Harrison!" She stammered, her voice suddenly high and desperate. "What a surprise! Derek is not here. He had a sudden change of plans regarding the wedding. We are so honored you came, but the ceremony is cancelled." Zane did not even glance at her. He walked straight up the altar steps, stopping just inches away from me. He reached out, taking a crisp white handkerchief from his breast pocket and gently handed it to me to dab the wine from my face. Then he slowly turned to face Beatrice. "I know Derek is not here," Zane said, his voice dangerously calm and echoing loudly without a microphone. "I know exactly where Derek is. He is at the Four Seasons attempting to marry a politician's daughter to secure a social standing he cannot afford. But what you do not know, Beatrice, is that your son is a fraud." The crowd erupted into shocked murmurs. Beatrice clutched her pearl necklace, stepping back as if she had been physically struck. "I beg your pardon?" she gasped. "My son is a brilliant financial mind. He just submitted a revolutionary restructuring algorithm for his vice president promotion." Zane laughed, a cold, harsh sound that made the front row flinch. "A revolutionary algorithm that he could not explain to my board of directors this morning," Zane countered. "An algorithm that contained embedded forensic tracking codes specific to high-level auditing software. Software that your son does not have the clearance or the intellect to use." Zane turned his gaze back to me. "But a senior forensic accountant definitely would." Zane looked deeply into my eyes, and I saw a calculated fire burning behind his calm demeanor. "He submitted your life's work as his own," Camille, Zane said clearly so the entire church could hear. "He stole your intellectual property. He is a coward and a thief, and he thinks he can leave you humiliated in front of his pathetic family." Zane stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly, but maintaining his commanding authority. "I have a problem with my board of directors trying to force me out of my own company, using my current unmarried status and alleged instability as an excuse. You have a problem with a family of parasites who just tried to destroy your life." Zane held out his hand toward me. "Marry me instead, Camille. Walk out of this church with me right now, become my wife, and I will give you the absolute power to crush every single one of them." The cathedral erupted. Guests were standing up, murmuring in absolute shock. Beatrice shrieked, her face turning a violent shade of purple. "You cannot do this!" she screamed, lunging forward to grab Zane's arm. "You are ruining my son's career. I will not let this street trash walk away with a billionaire." Before Beatrice could even touch his suit, two massive security guards in black suits materialized from the side aisle, effortlessly blocking her path and forcing her back into the front pew. Beatrice flailed, shouting obscenities that completely shattered her carefully cultivated high society image. I looked at Zane Harrison. I looked at his outstretched hand. I looked down at my ruined white dress stained with red wine representing 3 years of wasted loyalty. I did not need to think about it. I placed my hand firmly in his. "I accept," I said, my voice steady and clear. Zane offered a small, dangerous smile. He wrapped his arm protectively around my waist and guided me down the altar steps. We walked together back down the long center aisle. I kept my head held high, ignoring the gaping mouths and shocked stares of the people who had come to watch my humiliation. As we passed the third pew, Monique caught my eye again and raised her glass of water in a silent, victorious toast. We walked out of the heavy church doors into the bright sunlight, leaving the chaos and Beatrice's screaming echoes behind us. Zane's security detail opened the door to a sleek black Maybach waiting at the curb. We slid into the quiet, luxurious interior, and the heavy doors closed, shutting out the noise of the world. As the car pulled away smoothly from the curb, Zane poured 2 glasses of sparkling water from the car's console. "We have a lot of legal paperwork to draw up before tonight," he said, leaning back against the leather seat. "But first, I imagine you need to secure your personal assets. Derek is a desperate man." He was right. My forensic instincts flared. If Derek was willing to steal my work and abandon me at the altar for money, he was capable of much worse. I pulled my phone from the hidden pocket of my ruined dress and quickly logged into my secure banking portal. My heart did not pound. It just turned to ice. The joint savings account where I had deposited $80,000 for our future home was completely empty. The balance read zero. I quickly checked my personal checking account and found it drained to the minimum required balance. My fingers flew across the screen, pulling up my credit report. 3 new platinum credit cards had been opened in my name over the last 48 hours, and all of them were completely maxed out to the limit. Derek had not just abandoned me. He had financially gutted me, leaving me with nearly $100,000 of high-interest debt to pay for his new lavish lifestyle with the senator's daughter. Zane watched my face closely, his dark eyes studying my reaction. "How bad is it?" he asked, his tone indicating he was fully prepared to have his legal team destroy Derek immediately. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. A year ago, I would have broken down in tears. I would have panicked about how I was going to pay the rent or survive the debt. But sitting in the back of a billionaire's Maybach, wearing a wine-stained wedding dress, the betrayal felt different. It felt like absolute clarity. I let out a slow, cold laugh that surprised even myself. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. "He drained my accounts and maxed out my credit," I said, turning to look at Zane. "He took all my money to fund his new life." Zane narrowed his eyes. "My lawyers will freeze his assets by the end of the hour. We can have him arrested for wire fraud before the sun goes down." "No," I said, leaning forward, resting my hands on my lap. "Do not call your lawyers yet. Let him think he won. Let him enjoy his honeymoon suite at the Four Seasons." I slowly opened my small clutch purse and pulled out a sleek silver USB drive, holding it up to the light. "Derek thinks he took everything from me, but he is a very lazy man, Zane. When I built his algorithms and managed his servers, I did not just do his work. I built the architecture. As of right now, I hold the master administrative keys to the entire financial backend of his department at your company. He just gave me all the motivation I needed to lock him out of his own life." Zane Harrison looked at the USB drive and then looked up at my face. A genuine smile spread across his features, transforming him from a ruthless CEO into a very dangerous partner. "Mr. Harrison," I said softly, "take me to your office. It is time to go to work." The leather seats of Zane Harrison's Maybach were very cool against my skin. I did not shed a single tear for the money Derek had stolen from my accounts. Crying was a biological response to helplessness, and I was far from helpless. I reached down and unzipped the laptop bag that security had retrieved from my apartment. Zane watched me in silence, his dark eyes tracking my movements. "Insurance," I replied calmly. When I built the digital infrastructure for Derek's department, I did not just set up spreadsheets. I hard-coded a backdoor protocol into his server nodes. He thought I was just a supportive fiancé organizing his digital life. In reality, I was building a failsafe. Lines of green code cascaded down as I initiated the bypass. Derek had used my money and credit to buy his new life with the senator's daughter. But wealth today is completely digital, and I controlled the digits. With 3 keystrokes, I accessed Derek's offshore holding accounts. I simply scrambled the encryption keys and changed the biometric authentication protocols. I locked down his checking, his savings, his investment portfolios, and his secret cryptocurrency wallets. Right now, Derek could not even buy a cup of coffee. He was effectively locked out of his own existence. Zane let out a low whistle. "Remind me never to make you angry, Camille," he murmured. We pulled into the underground garage of the Harrison corporate tower. The private elevator whisked us up to the penthouse level, where the doors opened to a massive glass-walled office overlooking the city. Standing around a long mahogany conference table were 3 men in sharp suits, Zane's legal team. They slid a thick stack of documents across the polished wood surface. "Before we proceed with any marriage arrangements," Zane said, pouring 2 glasses of bourbon, "we need to establish the parameters of our partnership. This is an ironclad prenuptial agreement. My board of directors is looking for any excuse to vote me out, citing my lack of a stable family life as a liability to the stock. A sudden marriage solves that problem. But I do not run a charity, Camille. The agreement stipulates that you will be given executive power and unlimited resources to destroy Derek and his family. In exchange, you must prove that your intellect is a permanent asset to my empire. If you fail to demonstrate your worth within 30 days, the marriage is annulled and you walk away with nothing. I picked up the heavy document. The legal jargon was designed to make a normal person feel small. I set the document down and did not reach for the pen. Instead, I opened my laptop again and placed it right on top of the prenup. Proving my worth is your reasonable request, I said, looking directly into Zane's eyes. But if we are going to be partners, Mr. Harrison, you need to prove that your empire is actually worth my time. The lead lawyer scoffed a harsh sound of disbelief. Excuse me, miss, he started, but Zane held up a hand, silencing the man. Zane stepped closer, utterly fascinated. What are you doing, Camille? He asked softly. I am doing a background check on my new husband, I replied. My fingers danced across the keys. The Harrison corporate network was supposed to be a fortress, protected by military firewalls and expensive cybersecurity software. But every fortress has a structural weakness if you know how to look at the numbers. I bypassed the main security gate by piggybacking on an outdated internal communication port that their information technology department failed to patch. 60 seconds passed. The room was dead silent except for the rapid clicking of my keyboard. The lawyers exchanged nervous glances. Zane did not move a muscle. At the 2-minute mark, I breached the master ledger. At the 2-minute and 45-second mark, I found exactly what I was looking for. I hit the enter key one final time and turned the laptop around so the screen faced Zane and his legal team. You have a massive leak, I said, my voice echoing cleanly. Your internal audit team missed a series of shell company transfers in your overseas logistics division. Someone in your upper management has been slowly siphoning funds through inflated vendor invoices for the past 8 months. You are currently looking at a $40 million discrepancy. The lead lawyer leaned over the table, his face turning chalk white as he read the data on my screen. This is impossible, he whispered. Our team just cleared these accounts last week. Your team is incompetent, I replied calmly, shutting the laptop. I found it in under 3 minutes from a guest connection. I am not just a temporary solution to your board problem, Zane. I am the only person here who can stop you from bleeding millions. Zane stared at the closed laptop and then looked up at me. The polite business demeanor vanished, replaced by the primal look of a predator who had just found his equal. He realized in that exact moment that I was not a victim needing rescue. I was the most dangerous asset he could ever acquire. Zane slowly picked up the gold pen from the table and handed it to me. Sign the papers, Camille, he said, his voice thick with anticipation. We have a company to clean up. I took the pen, ready to finalize the alliance, but just as the ink touched the paper, my cell phone buzzed violently in my pocket. It was an emergency alert from the security system at my old apartment. The notification read that the master locks had been manually overridden and movement was detected in my private server room. I looked up at Zane, the cold reality setting in. Derek was not at the hotel. He was in my apartment and he was trying to rip out the physical servers holding the evidence we needed to destroy him. The drive back to the apartment I had shared with Derek was a blur of city lights and cold anticipation. Zane had offered to send a security team to retrieve my servers, but I declined. Those servers held the raw data of my entire career and the digital traps I had laid for Derek. I needed to disconnect them myself. I walked into the lobby of the luxury high-rise. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt like a transition between 2 different lives. When I opened the front door, the smell of expensive champagne hit me immediately. Derek was sitting on our expensive leather sofa. Next to him was a stunning blonde woman. This was obviously the politician's daughter. They were clinking crystal flutes together. Derek looked up. Well, look who decided to show up, he sneered, setting his glass down. I thought you would be crying in a cheap motel by now. I ignored his taunts and walked straight past the living room. I grabbed a large duffel bag and began unplugging the primary drives. Derek stood up quickly, blocking my path. "What do you think you are doing?" he demanded, his voice rising. "I am taking my equipment," I replied calmly. "I need my servers, Derek. You can keep the furniture. But this hardware belongs to me." His new wife strolled into the doorway, sipping her champagne. Her eyes raked over my wine-stained dress. "Is this the crazy ex-girlfriend, Derek?" she asked with a high-pitched laugh. "You did not tell me she was so pathetic." Derek laughed. "She is just a little upset because she finally realized her place in the world, honey." He turned his attention back to me and his smile vanished. "Leave the computers, Camille. You are not taking anything out of this apartment." I stopped what I was doing and looked him dead in the eye. "I built these servers, Derek. Every line of code on those drives is my intellectual property." Derek crossed his arms, looking incredibly pleased with himself. "It does not matter who built them," he said. "I am the only one on the lease. Therefore, anything inside these walls is legally my property. If you try to walk out of here with those servers, I will call the police and have you arrested for burglary." And honestly, Camille, the police will look at a hysterical woman in a ruined wedding dress, and they will look at a respected financial executive and his wealthy wife. Who do you think they are going to believe? I stared at the man I had almost married. The sheer audacity of his greed was astounding. He thought society would automatically side with him because he was wearing a tailored suit and standing next to a politician's daughter. I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. "Go ahead and call your billionaire Derek," mocked, gesturing toward the phone. "Tell him your big bad ex-fiancé is being mean to you." "It will not change the law, Camille. I own this space." I dialed Zane's private number. He answered on the very first ring. "Is it done?" I asked, keeping my eyes locked on Derek. "The paperwork was finalized 2 minutes ago," Zane replied, his voice smooth and dangerous through the speaker. "The entire property is now officially a subsidiary of the Harrison corporate empire. You have full authorization." "Thank you," I said, and ended the call. Derek rolled his eyes. "Get out of my apartment right now, Camille. I am counting to 3 before I dial 911. Before he could even say the number 1, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. Derek's new wife frowned and walked over to open it. Standing in the hallway was Mr. Peterson, the building manager, flanked by 2 large security guards. Mr. Peterson looked incredibly uncomfortable, but he held a thick manila folder in his hands. Derek walked out of the office. "Peterson, what is the meaning of this?" he barked. "I did not call for security. I am dealing with a trespasser right now. You need to escort her out of my home." Mr. Peterson walked straight past him and handed the manila folder to me. "Miss Camille, as requested, here are the updated ownership documents," he said nervously. Derek stared at the manager in utter confusion. "What are you talking about, Peterson?" I opened the folder and pulled out a crisp sheet of paper. I held the document up so he could see the bold black text. 15 minutes ago, Harrison Corporation purchased this entire residential building," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, authoritative register. "That means Zane Harrison is now your landlord." Derek's face lost all its color. He looked from the paper to me, and then to the security guards. "You cannot do this," he stammered, taking a step back. "I have a lease. I have tenant rights. You cannot just buy a building to kick me out." "Actually, Derek, I can," I replied, stepping closer to him. "If you read the fine print of your lease agreement, there is a strict morality clause. As your landlord, we have determined that your recent involvement in corporate theft and financial fraud violates that clause. This is a 0-day eviction notice." I handed the paper to him. He took it with shaking hands. "You have exactly 10 minutes to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises," I said clearly. "The security team will escort you and your new bride to the street. Oh, and Derek, you are not allowed to take the computers. Those legally belong to the landlord now." Derek's new wife dropped her champagne glass, shattering it against the hardwood floor. She began screaming at Derek, demanding to know what was happening and why they were being thrown out like common criminals. Derek could not answer her. He just stared at the eviction notice, his arrogant facade completely shattered. I stood in the doorway of the 12th floor apartment and watched the security team escort Derek and his screaming new bride down the hallway. He tried to pull away and walk with dignity, but the building manager kept a firm grip on his tailored jacket. Derek shot one last venomous look over his shoulder before the elevator doors closed, shutting him out of my life, and out of the luxury he thought he was entitled to. I walked back inside the apartment that used to be our home. The silence was absolute. I did not feel sad. I felt a profound sense of relief. I walked straight to the spare bedroom and began packing my servers into the heavy canvas transport bags. These machines held my entire career, and they were coming with me to Zane Harrison's penthouse. I carried the heavy bags down to the lobby. The concierge, who had always ignored me in the past, rushed forward to hold the glass doors open, bowing slightly as I passed. Word travels fast when you are suddenly engaged to the man who owns the entire zip code. As I stepped out onto the busy city sidewalk, a sleek metallic gray Porsche Cayenne pulled up to the curb. The tinted window rolled down, and I expected to see one of Derek's wealthy friends coming to his rescue. Instead, the driver's side door opened, and Monique stepped out onto the pavement. She was 34 years old, a brilliant African-American woman, and one of the top luxury real estate agents in the city. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored cream suit that contrasted beautifully with her flawless dark skin. Her natural hair was styled perfectly, and she wore a pair of oversized designer sunglasses. Monique had married Derek's older brother 5 years ago, and from the very beginning, I knew she was the only intelligent person in that entire toxic family. She took off her sunglasses and looked at the pile of server bags at my feet. Then she looked down the street where Derek and his new wife were desperately trying to hail a cab. "I thought you might come here to gloat," Monique said, her voice smooth and carrying a hint of amusement. "Or maybe to cry. But you are packing up your tech empire. Good for you, Camille." I crossed my arms, feeling defensive for a moment. "If you are here to defend your brother-in-law, Monique, you are wasting your breath. I just evicted him. I am fully aware," she replied, leaning against her car. "I am the one who texted Zane Harrison's assistant the address of this building." My eyes widened in surprise. "You helped Zane buy the building?" I asked. Monique smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. "I am a real estate broker, Camille. I know exactly who owns what and how fast a cash transaction can clear. But I did not come here to talk about real estate. I came here to give you a wedding present." She reached into the passenger seat of her Porsche and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She walked over and handed it to me. "What is this?" I asked, taking the heavy envelope. "That is the financial ruin of my husband and my mother-in-law," Monique said, her tone turning dead serious. "Open it." I slid the papers out. My forensic accounting brain instantly recognized the documents. They were secondary mortgage approvals and wire transfer receipts. Beatrice forced my husband to secretly remortgage our home last month. Monique explained, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "We had paid off that house. It was supposed to be our security. But Beatrice convinced him that Derek needed a massive cash injection to impress the senator's daughter and pay for that ridiculous wedding. She told my husband it was a short-term loan and that Derek would pay it back as soon as he got his big promotion." I stared at the numbers. Beatrice had leveraged her own oldest son to fund Derek's lies. "I found these papers hidden in his home office yesterday," Monique continued. "I confronted him, and he admitted everything. He chose his toxic, manipulative mother over his own wife and our financial future. Beatrice has spent the last 5 years making snide comments about my background, my career, and my race, disguised as polite dinner table conversation. I tolerated it because I loved my husband, but stealing from me to fund Derek's fake lifestyle was the absolute last straw. I am done, Camille. I am filing for divorce, and I am going to make sure Beatrice loses everything she holds dear. But I cannot do it alone. You have the access to the corporate accounts and the ear of a billionaire. I have the social connections and the real estate dirt. I want an alliance, We are going to destroy this family from the inside out. I looked at Monique. We had always been cordial, but we had never been close. Now we were bound by a shared betrayal and a mutual desire for absolute justice. I will gladly tear them apart with you, Monique, I said, shaking her hand. But first, I need to get these servers to Zane's office and start tracking the rest of the stolen money. Monique shook her head urgently. You do not have time for that, Camille, she warned, grabbing my arm. You need to get back to the Harrison corporate headquarters right now. Derek is not crying in a taxi. He went straight from this apartment to the office. He called an emergency meeting with the board of directors. He is pitching your stolen algorithm right now, trying to convince them to oust Zane Harrison and name him the new vice president. If the corporate board approves his pitch, your code becomes company property, and Zane loses his leverage entirely. You have to stop him before he finishes that massive presentation to the entire executive board. The drive to the Harrison corporate headquarters took 10 minutes, but my mind was racing. I sat in the passenger seat of Monique's Porsche, gripping the door handle. The financial stakes had skyrocketed. Derek was not just stealing my algorithm, he was trying to use it to stage a corporate coup against Zane. If the board approved his presentation, my code would legally become the property of Harrison Venture Capital. Derek would become an untouchable vice president, and I would lose all leverage. We pulled up to the glass skyscraper and parked at the front entrance. Zane was waiting in the massive marble lobby surrounded by his security team. He took one look at my face and knew exactly what was happening. We did not waste time with pleasantries or explanations. We walked straight past the reception desk and stepped into the private executive elevator. The ride to the 50th floor was completely silent. I smoothed down my ruined wedding dress, which was still heavily stained with the dark red wine Beatrice had thrown on me at the church. I must have looked like a complete madwoman to anyone else, but inside my head, I felt nothing but absolute clarity and sharp purpose. The elevator doors slid open to the executive suite, and I could already hear Derek's arrogant voice echoing down the long carpeted hallway. We approached the heavy double doors of the main boardroom. 2 armed security guards stood outside, but they stepped aside immediately when they saw Zane approaching. I pushed the heavy wooden doors open. The room was massive, featuring a long mahogany table seating 12 of the most powerful investors and executives in the city. At the front of the room stood Derek. He was wearing his expensive, custom-tailored suit, confidently clicking through a massive slideshow presentation on the digital projector behind him. He was grinning, soaking in the admiring nods of the wealthy board members. Look at these long-term projections, Derek was saying, pointing to a glowing graph on the screen. This algorithm will predict market downturns with a 90% accuracy rate, saving this firm billions of dollars over the next decade. It is an entirely new mathematical architecture that I developed from scratch during my late nights at the office. When the heavy oak doors banged loudly against the wall, Derek's voice completely died in his throat. The entire board of directors stopped taking notes and turned around in their expensive leather chairs to look at the entrance. Zane walked into the room first, radiating an aura of undeniable authority. I walked into the room right behind him, keeping my chin held high. The sudden silence in the boardroom was incredibly deafening. Several of the older executives actually gasped out loud when they saw my wine-stained dress and disheveled hair. Derek gripped the sharp edges of his wooden podium, his knuckles turning completely white. "What is the exact meaning of this interruption?" one of the senior board members demanded, standing up from his chair. "Mr. Harrison, we are in the middle of a very critical presentation by Derek regarding the new predictive algorithm that will secure our future profits." Zane walked slowly toward the front of the room, ignoring the angry board member entirely. He stopped right next to Derek, who looked like he was about to pass out from pure panic. "Gentleman," Zane said, his deep voice echoing loudly across the silent boardroom. "I sincerely apologize for the dramatic interruption, but there has been a sudden and immediate corporate restructuring of our senior executive team. As the chief executive officer, I have the unilateral authority to appoint new financial oversight when I detect severe irregularities within our departments. I am utilizing that specific authority right now." Derek tried to speak, but nothing came out of his dry mouth. Zane turned slowly and gestured toward me. I would like to formally introduce you all to Camille. Zane continued looking around the table. She is one of the top forensic accountants in the city, and as of 5 minutes ago, she is the new chief auditor of the Harrison corporate empire. Effective immediately, she will be conducting a complete top-to-bottom forensic review of every single project portfolio and algorithm in this building, starting with the one currently displayed on that projection screen behind you. The wealthy board members began whispering frantically among themselves. Derek's face cycled rapidly through sheer panic, absolute confusion, and then blinding rage. He looked at the complex projection screen and then looked back at me standing there in my ruined white dress. He knew instantly that if I audited his project, I would easily prove that the core coding was mine. He was completely trapped in front of the most important men in the financial district. But Derek was a desperate survivor of the worst kind. Instead of surrendering and admitting his guilt, he went on a vicious offensive. He slammed his hands down on the podium, silencing the whispering executives. "This is an absolute outrage," Derek shouted, his voice shaking with fake indignation. "You cannot do this, Zane. You are bringing a hostile outsider into our highly secure facility. Do you people know who this crazy woman actually is?" he asked, pointing an accusing finger directly at my face. "She is my mentally unstable ex-fiancé, who I just broke up with this morning because I caught her trying to steal company secrets." Derek stepped away from the podium, pacing back and forth like a victim trying desperately to warn his allies. "She is a dangerous corporate spy," he yelled, pointing at the screen behind him. "She saw my brilliant work on my home computer, and she has been trying to extort me for millions of dollars to keep quiet. Do not let her anywhere near our private servers. She did not come in here to audit my code. Gentlemen, she came here to steal my algorithm and sell it to our competitors." The boardroom erupted into chaos the moment Derek pointed his finger at me and accused me of corporate espionage. Several board members began speaking at once, demanding answers from Zane, while others glared at me with deep suspicion. The oldest man at the table, Richard, slammed his hand against the mahogany wood, demanding order. He looked directly at Zane and then at me. "Mr. Harrison," Richard said, his voice vibrating with anger, "you cannot walk in here and hand over our secure network to a woman he claims is a hostile actor. If she claims this algorithm is hers, we need undeniable proof of ownership right now. Otherwise, I am calling building security and having her arrested for industrial theft." Derek smiled a triumphant smile. He adjusted his tie and looked at me with venom. "Yes, Camille," he sneered, stepping away from the podium and gesturing toward his laptop. "Show the board your proof. Show them how you supposedly wrote a predictive algorithm that took me 6 months to perfect." He was calling my bluff, confident that I had no physical notes or legal documents on me. He thought because my name was not on the title, I was powerless. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice or defend my character. Forensic accounting is not about screaming louder than your opponent. It is about letting numbers talk. I walked slowly to the front of the room, my wine-stained dress swishing against the carpet. I stepped past Derek, ignoring his smug face, and stopped at his presentation podium. I looked at the complex projection screen displaying the glowing graphs of the algorithm. Then I looked down at Derek's unlocked laptop. I placed my hands on the keyboard. "What are you doing?" Derek snapped, stepping forward. "Do not touch my computer." Zane's security guards instantly stepped between Derek and the podium, forcing him back. "Let the chief auditor do her job," Zane commanded, his voice freezing the room. I typed command prompts into the terminal. I did not search for hidden files or my name in the metadata. Instead, I executed a live audit command that I had hard-coded into the software. I pressed the Enter key and stepped back from the podium. Instantly, the projection screen turned black. A loud error buzzer echoed from the speakers. The glowing graphs vanished, replaced by a single line of flashing red text that read, "Fatal system architectural error, predictive functions disabled." Derek's face dropped. "What did you do?" he demanded, rushing forward to his laptop. He frantically hammered the keyboard, trying to restart the presentation and run the bypass protocols he had memorized. But nothing worked. The system was completely locked down. "What is happening?" Richard demanded, leaning over the table. "Why did the algorithm crash?" It crashed because Derek does not know how to drive the car he stole, I said, turning to face the board. A predictive algorithm of this magnitude requires a massive intake of raw market data. When I built this code, I knew it would handle billions, so I programmed a fatal flaw into the data funnel. If the system detects an unauthorized user attempting to run a simulation without the biometric bypass, the algorithm corrupts its cache to prevent data theft. I pointed at Derek, who was sweating profusely, his hands shaking as he typed line after line of useless code. He has been standing up here pitching this project as his masterpiece, I continued. But he cannot fix that error because he does not know the bypass. He does not know the bypass because he did not write the architecture. Derek slammed his fists onto the keyboard, his image of a genius executive crumbling. He looked up at the board, his eyes wide with panic. "She planted a virus," he stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It is a trick. She is trying to sabotage me because I left her at the altar today." I ignored his pathetic excuse. I reached over, typed 8 characters into the terminal, and hit enter. The screen instantly flashed green. The presentation returned to normal, running perfectly. The boardroom fell into stunned silence. The proof was absolute and undeniable. Derek stood there, publicly humiliated, exposed as a fraud who could not operate his own invention. Several board members shook their heads in disgust, writing furiously in their notepads. But the board was a political minefield, and not everyone was convinced. Richard leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his chin. "This proves you know the code," he said, his eyes narrowing. "But it does not prove you are a stable addition to this company. This looks like a domestic dispute spilling into our headquarters. We have billions on the line, Mr. Harrison, and you just gave executive power to a scorned woman who admits sabotaging our assets. This is an unacceptable liability." Before Zane could respond, a sharp buzzing sound cut through the tension. It was Derek's cell phone sitting on the podium. Then Richard's phone buzzed. Then every phone around the massive table began to vibrate and chime simultaneously. Derek grabbed his phone, his eyes scanning the screen. A slow, malicious grin spread across his face, replacing his previous panic. He looked up at me and laughed. "A liability," Richard, Derek said, holding his phone up for the board to see. "You do not know the half of it. My mother just sent this to every major news outlet in the city." I pulled my phone from my pocket. My stomach tightened as I read the breaking news alert. Beatrice had launched a massive coordinated media smear campaign online. There were fabricated screenshots, doctored emails, and an article going viral. The headline screamed that I was a manipulative gold digger who had faked an engagement with Derek to infiltrate the company and sleep my way into the chief auditor position with the CEO. Beatrice was destroying my reputation. The boardroom doors closed, but the damage was already spreading across the digital world. Beatrice had not just sent a few angry emails, she had hired a boutique public relations firm specializing in character assassination. By the time the stock market opened the next morning, the Harrison corporate ticker symbol was flashing red. The stock had only dipped 2%, but in the world of venture capital, a 2% drop translated to hundreds of millions of dollars in lost market capitalization. I sat in the luxurious leather chair across from Zane's massive desk, watching the news channels play on the muted television screens mounted on the wall. My face was plastered next to Derek's, with a sensational headline reading "Billionaire CEO Manipulated by Rogue Accountant in Corporate Love Triangle." Zane's private phone had not stopped ringing for 3 hours. The board of directors was panicking. Several major shareholders had personally called demanding my immediate termination to stabilize the stock price. They did not care that I had saved them from Derek's $40 million mistake. They only cared about the optics of a scandal. Zane stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city skyline, sipping his black coffee. He did not look worried. He looked like a general analyzing a battlefield. "One of the senior partners just threatened to pull his funding if I do not fire you before the press conference at noon," Zane said without turning around. "He thinks this media circus is making the firm look incredibly weak." "And what did you tell him?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I told him that if he withdraws his funding, I will personally hostile take over his remaining assets and liquidate his life work." Zane replied, turning to face me with a sharp smile. I do not take orders from panicking old men, Camille. But we do have a very real public relations nightmare on our hands. Beatrice is playing the grieving mother card brilliantly. He pressed a button on his desk, and the audio from the television filled the room. Beatrice was appearing as a special guest on a highly popular local society podcast. The host was known for tearing into local gossip. Beatrice was sobbing, her voice trembling with perfectly practiced theatrical grief. She was wearing a modest gray sweater, completely abandoning her usual flashy jewelry to look like a humble victim. I just do not understand how someone could be so cruel, Beatrice cried, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. We welcomed Camille into our family with open arms. My son Derek loved her so much, he gave her everything. But she was always so jealous of his success. She used his computer to steal his work, and then she seduced his boss to get him fired on what was supposed to be their wedding day. My poor son is entirely broken. I listened to the absolute garbage spilling from her mouth and felt a cold wave of disgust. Beatrice was weaponizing her age and her tears to destroy my life. She knew society loved a scandal, and she knew people would automatically judge a young female executive who suddenly rose to power. Zane muted the television. The corporate communications director wants you to issue a formal apology statement, Zane said, walking back to his desk. They want you to step down from the chief auditor position temporarily while we conduct an internal investigation. It is the standard playbook to calm the shareholders. I looked at Zane. I am not stepping down, I said firmly. And I am absolutely not issuing an apology. Standard playbooks are for people who are actually guilty. If we release a public relations statement defending ourselves, we legitimize her lies. We are not going to play her game on her battlefield. I stood up and grabbed my briefcase. I need to face the press, I said. I will not hide. Zane nodded. My security team will escort you. Do not say a single word. I took the private elevator down to the ground floor. The massive glass lobby of the Harrison building was absolutely swarming with aggressive reporters and flashing cameras. The moment the elevator doors opened, they surged forward like a pack of starving wolves holding microphones out and shouting overlapping questions. Camille, did you steal the algorithm? One reporter yelled, shoving a microphone toward my face. How long have you been sleeping with Mr. Harrison? Another shouted. The security team formed a tight circle around me, physically pushing the reporters back. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my expression completely blank, and my eyes focused straight ahead. I did not flinch when the camera flashes blinded me. I did not speed up my walking pace. I moved through the chaotic lobby with the cold grace of a woman who had absolutely nothing to hide. Let them take their pictures. Let them write their articles. The truth does not need to scream to be heard. I stepped into the waiting town car, and the heavy doors slammed shut, blocking out the noise of the flashing cameras. The driver smoothly pulled away from the curb, merging into the heavy city traffic. I leaned back against the seat, taking a slow, deep breath. The media smear was intense, but it was completely built on a foundation of lies, and lies require constant funding to maintain. Beatrice was spending thousands of dollars she did not have on public relations teams and podcast appearances. She was bleeding money trying to keep her fake story alive. I pulled my phone from my briefcase and opened my encrypted messaging application. I found Monique's name in the contacts. The media circus is active, I typed. Beatrice feels totally untouchable right now, Monique replied. That is perfect. A distracted target never sees the sniper. I smiled, staring at the screen. Let them have the headlines, I typed back. Initiate phase 1 immediately. It is time to cut her oxygen supply completely. I sat in my new corner office overlooking the city skyline, opening my laptop. The media smear campaign was raging outside, but inside the Harrison corporate network, I was the absolute authority. Phase 1 of our counterattack was simple financial asphyxiation. As the chief auditor, I had the legal right to freeze any accounts suspected of corporate embezzlement. I did not just freeze his work expense accounts. I traced the $80,000 he stole from my personal savings and legally linked the transfer nodes to his corporate bonuses, flagging the entire financial cluster as highly fraudulent activity. I hit the enter key, and watched as every single credit card, bank account, and offshore fund tied to Derek's name instantly locked down. The screen flashed red, indicating an absolute freeze. He was now financially paralyzed. Monique had elite connections everywhere in the city. 10 minutes after I initiated the total asset freeze, my phone buzzed with a text message from her. It was a live security feed from a contact she had at the premier exotic car dealership downtown. I clicked the secure link and watched the silent video playing on my screen. Derek was standing in the immaculate showroom next to a gleaming red Ferrari. His new wife was standing a few feet away, with her arms crossed, looking incredibly annoyed. Derek was trying to buy her a $250,000 apology gift for the absolute disaster of their wedding day and his public humiliation. I watched as Derek casually handed his black titanium credit card to the sales manager with a smug, arrogant smile. The manager swiped the card through the terminal. The machine beeped a sharp warning, declined. Derek laughed awkwardly, waving his hand dismissively and pulling out another premium platinum card from his wallet. He handed it over with forced confidence. Swiped, declined. The sales manager's polite customer service smile began to fade into a look of deep suspicion. Derek started getting visibly agitated, pulling out every single piece of plastic in his expensive leather wallet. One by one, the manager ran them through the system. Every single card triggered an immediate high-level fraud alert. But the absolute best part was the strict corporate policy of the major credit companies. Because I had flagged the accounts for severe corporate embezzlement, the machine did not just decline the transactions. The screen instructed the merchant to immediately retain the stolen property. I watched with immense satisfaction as the sales manager pulled a heavy pair of scissors from his desk drawer and calmly cut Derek's elite titanium cards right down the middle, snapping them into pieces. Derek's face turned bright red as he began screaming at the manager, pointing his finger aggressively. His new wealthy wife, completely mortified by the scene, turned on her heel and stormed out of the showroom, leaving Derek behind to deal with the mess. Dealership security guards quickly stepped forward, grabbing his arms and escorting a humiliated, screaming, and entirely penniless Derek out the front doors and onto the busy sidewalk. I closed the video link and smiled, feeling the cold weight of justice settling in my chest. He was completely cut off from the world he thought he ruled. I packed up my leather briefcase, preparing to head down to the legal department to review the final merger documents for Zane. I stepped out of my office and walked down the quiet executive hallway. The evening shift had started, and the 50th floor was mostly empty, giving the building an eerie silence. I pressed the call button for the private executive elevator. The heavy silver doors slid open, and I stepped inside, pressing the illuminated button for the 10th floor. Just as the doors were about to slide shut, a hand shot through the narrow gap, violently forcing the metal panels back open. Derek stormed into the elevator. He was breathing heavily, his hair wild and unkempt, and his expensive tailored suit was deeply wrinkled. He looked absolutely deranged, driven mad by his sudden powerlessness. Before I could even reach for the emergency call button, he slammed his hand against the main control panel, hitting the red emergency stop switch. The elevator lurched to a violent halt, trapping us inside a metal box suspended between floors. He stepped forward, cornering me against the mirrored back wall, closing the distance between us, until I could smell the stale alcohol and sweat radiating from his body. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Camille?" he snarled, his voice echoing loudly in the small, confined space. "You think you can just freeze my money, steal my algorithms, and completely ruin my life without any consequences?" I stood my absolute ground, keeping my posture straight and my face perfectly blank, refusing to show him even a single ounce of fear. "You ruined your own life, Derek," I replied, my voice as cold as ice. I just adjusted the accounting to reflect the truth. He let out a dark, desperate laugh that sounded more like a growl. He reached into his wrinkled jacket pocket, pulling out a thick manila envelope, and slammed it heavily against the elevator wall right next to my head. "You want to play dirty with me?" he whispered, pulling out a thick stack of glossy photographs. He forcefully shoved them into my hands. I looked down at the terrifying images. They were expertly fabricated blackmail photos, showing my face digitally attached to a woman doing highly illegal and deeply compromising things. "If you do not unfreeze my accounts and publicly resign right now," Derek threatened, leaning in closer, "I will send these to every news outlet and the federal authorities." I stared at the glossy photos in my hands, recognizing the absolute desperation in his bloodshot eyes. He had lost everything, and now he was willing to cross every single legal boundary to regain his power. The elevator remained completely silent, suspended in the dark shaft as we stared at each other. While Derek was attacking me in a stalled elevator, my brilliant ally Monique executed her own flawless strike across town. As chief auditor, I had frozen Derek's corporate bonuses, which directly severed the lifeline to his mother. Beatrice had no idea her financial oxygen had just been cut off. She was sitting on the sun-drenched outdoor patio of the highly exclusive Oakbridge Country Club, surrounded by 4 of the wealthiest socialites in the city. Beatrice wore a wide-brimmed designer hat and a pristine white linen suit, laughing loudly while sipping a glass of imported champagne. Oakbridge was not just a golf club, it was the ultimate status symbol for the local elite. Beatrice was treating her friends to a lavish seafood lunch, desperately trying to control the narrative about the ruined wedding. She spun a tragic tale about how she had tried to save her son from a manipulative gold digger, but thankfully Derek had escaped my clutches. Sitting 2 tables away, perfectly positioned to hear every lie, was Monique. She looked breathtaking in a tailored emerald green dress, her dark skin glowing in the afternoon sun. Monique was casually scrolling through her phone, waiting for my exact signal. When she received my encrypted message confirming the total asset freeze, Monique smiled and signaled the waiter. She ordered another bottle of expensive champagne sent directly to Beatrice's table. Beatrice was absolutely delighted when the waiter brought the chilled bottle. She raised her glass, toasting to new beginnings, completely unaware she was drinking on borrowed time. When the lunch finally concluded, the waiter presented Beatrice with the leather-bound checkbook. The bill was nearly $800. Beatrice did not even blink. She pulled out her glittering premium credit card and dropped it onto the silver tray with a practiced flick of her wrist, continuing her gossiping without missing a beat. The waiter walked away to process the payment. Monique adjusted her posture, leaning back in her chair to watch the inevitable explosion. Minutes later, the waiter returned, accompanied by the dining room manager. The manager looked incredibly uncomfortable, holding the leather checkbook tightly in both hands. "Excuse me, madam," the manager said, leaning down to whisper discreetly to Beatrice. "I am so sorry to interrupt your lovely afternoon, but there seems to be an issue with your card. It has been declined." Her laughter stopped immediately. Her wealthy friends paused their conversations, looking over with mild curiosity. Beatrice let out a highly exaggerated sigh, rolling her eyes as if dealing with gross incompetence. "Oh, please," she scoffed, waving her hand. "The bank is probably just verifying the unusual champagne purchase. Run it again or use the platinum card in my wallet." She handed the manager a second card. He nodded and walked away. The table fell into an awkward silence. Beatrice tried to fill the void with more complaints about the banking system, but her friends were exchanging subtle, knowing glances. The manager returned. His expression was completely rigid. "I apologize, madam," the manager said, his voice slightly louder this time. "Every card on your account has returned a severe lock code. The system is instructing us to confiscate the plastic. Furthermore, I have just been informed your membership dues are severely delinquent." Beatrice's face turned a mottled red. The socialites at her table physically pulled back, shifting from curiosity to pure judgment. Beatrice stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the patio. "How dare you speak to me like this?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. That was when Monique decided to join the conversation. She stood up gracefully, picking up her handbag and walking over to Beatrice's table. Monique put on an expression of deep, exaggerated sympathy. "Oh, Beatrice," Monique said loudly, ensuring her voice carried across the patio. "Please do not yell at the poor manager. It is not his fault the bank finally caught up with you. I tried to warn you about living so far beyond your means." Beatrice whipped her head around, staring at Monique with absolute hatred. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. "Mind your own business." "But Beatrice, it is my business," Monique replied, pulling a folded stack of papers from her handbag. "As a premier real estate broker, I get alerts when local properties enter pre-foreclosure. I was absolutely heartbroken to see your beautiful estate on the list." Monique intentionally let the papers slip from her hands. The documents scattered across the stone floor directly at the feet of Beatrice's wealthy friends. The bold red letters reading "Notice of Default" were impossible to miss. The socialites gasped, covering their mouths. "You forced my husband to secretly mortgage our home to pay for your fake lifestyle," Monique continued, her voice ringing with absolute clarity. "You have been completely broke for years, Beatrice. You are drowning in debt, and now your accounts are frozen because your son was caught embezzling money." Every single member was staring at Beatrice. The illusion of her wealth shattered into a million pieces. The manager gestured toward the exit, asking her to leave the premises immediately to avoid a scene. Her friends simply gathered their expensive purses and walked away, treating her like an absolute stranger. Beatrice stood completely alone, publicly exposed as a massive fraud. She grabbed her purse and ran toward the parking lot, tears of absolute humiliation streaming down her face. She drove frantically to Derek's hotel, finding him pacing the floor. Both of them were now completely stripped of their money, their power, and their social standing. They were backed into a corner, and desperate animals are the most dangerous. Sitting in the dark hotel room, mother and son realized they could not win by playing by the rules. They hatched a deeply criminal plan. They pulled out old lease agreements and began scheming to forge my signature on a set of fake intellectual property documents to frame me for corporate fraud and take everything back from my control. The underground parking garage of the Harrison Corporate Tower was cold and dimly lit after midnight. My footsteps echoed against the concrete pillars as I walked toward my car. The events of the day had been exhausting, but I felt an incredible surge of adrenaline. I had completely dismantled Beatrice's social standing and frozen every single asset Derek possessed. I pressed the unlock button on my key fob, and the headlights of my sedan flashed in the darkness. As I reached for the door handle, a tall shadow detached itself from the concrete pillar next to my parking space. It was Derek. He looked nothing like the polished executive who had tried to humiliate me at the altar just days ago. His suit was rumpled, his eyes were frantic, and he smelled strongly of cheap liquor and sheer desperation. He stepped directly into my path, physically blocking me from getting into my vehicle. "You really thought you had me beat, did you not, Camille?" He sneered, his voice echoing loudly in the empty garage. "You thought you could just press a few buttons on your computer and completely erase my entire life." I stood perfectly still, keeping my distance. I did not reach for my pepper spray or call for corporate security. I wanted to see exactly how far he was willing to go to save himself. "I did not erase your life, Derek," I replied, my voice completely calm. "I simply corrected the math. You took things that did not belong to you, and now the universe is balancing the ledger." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh that bounced off the concrete walls. He reached inside his wrinkled suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "The universe does not care about math, Camille," he whispered, stepping closer until he was invading my personal space. "The universe only cares about who holds the winning hand, and I just drew the absolute best card in the deck." He aggressively shoved the envelope against my chest, forcing me to take it. "Open it," he commanded, crossing his arms over his chest with a look of supreme arrogance. I slowly opened the clasp and pulled out a stack of crisp legal documents. Even in the dim fluorescent light of the parking garage, I could clearly see the bold legal letterhead. It was a comprehensive intellectual property transfer agreement. I scanned the dense paragraphs of legal jargon. The document explicitly stated that I willfully surrendered all rights, ownership, and administrative access regarding the predictive algorithm directly to Derek. But the most important part was at the very bottom of the final page. There, staring back at me, was my own signature, perfectly executed in black ink and dated 3 weeks before our canceled wedding. It was an absolute masterpiece of forgery. Beatrice and Derek had clearly hired a professional criminal to replicate my handwriting down to the exact pressure of the pen strokes. "Do you see that, Camille?" Derek asked, his voice dripping with poisonous triumph. "That is a legally binding contract proving that you gave me the algorithm willingly. It proves that your little stunt in the boardroom today was an act of malicious corporate sabotage designed to ruin my career. If I take these documents to the board, they will instantly fire you and remove Zane from his position as well. But I am not going to stop there. I am going to take these straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I will have you arrested for wire fraud, corporate espionage, and grand larceny. You will spend the next 20 years in a federal prison while I take my rightful place as the vice president of this company." I stared at the forged signature, my forensic mind instantly analyzing the ink spread and the paper grain. They were incredibly desperate, and this was their final Hail Mary play. They thought the threat of federal prison would break my resolve and force me back into submission. They honestly believed I was still that weak woman they could easily manipulate. "You have exactly 24 hours to make a choice, Camille." Derek sneered, leaning in so close I could feel his hot breath on my face. "You are going to log into the corporate network and completely unfreeze all of my bank accounts. Then you are going to draft a public letter of resignation stating that you lied about everything due to emotional distress over our breakup. If you do not meet every single one of my demands by tomorrow night, I am handing this envelope to the authorities and watching them put you in handcuffs." He took a step back, adjusting his wrinkled tie, trying to reclaim his lost dignity. I looked at the documents, and then I looked up at his desperate, sweating face. I did not cry. I did not beg for mercy or try to negotiate. Instead, I let a slow, incredibly cold smile spread across my face. I carefully slid the forged documents back into the manila envelope and tucked it securely under my arm. "You want my final answer, Derek?" I asked, my voice echoing softly in the dark garage. He nodded, his eyes narrowing in suspicion at my total lack of panic. "I will give you my answer tomorrow night," I said clearly. "I will see you and your mother at the Harrison Annual Charity Gala. Wear a nice suit, Derek, because it is going to be a very memorable evening." He scowled, clearly unnerved by my calm demeanor, but he turned around and stormed off into the darkness of the garage. As soon as he was completely out of sight, I opened my briefcase. I carefully pulled out a sterile plastic evidence bag. Using the very tips of my fingernails, I slid the manila envelope inside the bag and sealed it tight. Derek thought he had handed me my destruction, but he had just handed me his fingerprints on a federal forgery. The Harrison Annual Charity Gala was the absolute most anticipated and glamorous event of the entire winter social season. It was held in a historic hotel dripping with crystal chandeliers and gold leaf molding. Despite suddenly losing her exclusive country club membership, Beatrice arrived in a long-rented limousine acting like royalty. She wore a highly dramatic silver sequined gown, completely ignoring the loud whispers about her ruin. Derek stepped out next, confidently adjusting his tuxedo, looking incredibly smug. He had forced me into a corner in the parking garage 24 hours ago, and he genuinely believed he had won. His new wealthy wife clung to his arm, wearing a forced smile, trying to push past the humiliation at the car dealership. They posed, acting like absolute royalty, projecting an image of untouchable wealth. 5 minutes later, Zane's customized black Maybach glided to a smooth halt at the red carpet. The moment the security team opened the door, the entire atmosphere outside the hotel shifted completely. I stepped out onto the red carpet, and the collective flash of 100 cameras practically turned the dark night into bright daylight. I was not wearing a ruined wedding dress anymore. Zane had arranged for a custom-fitted midnight blue silk gown that flowed like water when I walked. Around my neck rested a breathtaking diamond necklace from the Harrison family vault, catching the light with blinding brilliance. Zane stepped out behind me, wearing a perfectly tailored classic black tuxedo. He offered me his arm, and I took it, smiling warmly for the cameras. The press went absolutely wild. The reporters completely abandoned Derek and Beatrice, rushing toward us, shouting Zane's name. Derek and his family were instantly pushed into the shadows, becoming completely irrelevant background noise as the media swarmed the billionaire chief executive officer and his new chief auditor. We walked slowly down the red carpet, projecting absolute unity and unstoppable power. I could feel Derek's eyes burning into my back as we glided past them without a single glance in their direction. The grand ballroom was breathtaking, filled with towering floral arrangements and velvet tables. The guest list included 500 of the most influential politicians, investors, and socialites in the country. Zane guided me through the crowd, effortlessly introducing me to key board members and international clients. He introduced me as his brilliant partner and the savior of the predictive algorithm project. I shook hands, smiled politely, and completely cemented my place in their world. I was no longer the quiet forensic accountant hiding in a cubicle. I was a prominent executive holding court among the elite, completely changing the narrative of my own life. Guests soon found their carefully assigned seats for the lavish dinner. As the host of the entire gala, Zane naturally had the premier table positioned directly in the center of the room with a perfect view of the main stage. I took my seat next to him, feeling completely confident. Monique arrived looking absolutely stunning in a bold crimson dress and took the seat to my right, giving me a subtle nod of solidarity. But the true masterpiece of the evening was the seating arrangement Zane had personally orchestrated. Right next to our premier table, separated by only a few feet of carpet, was the table assigned to Derek, his new wife, and Beatrice. Zane had intentionally placed them close enough to witness everything, but far enough away to establish the absolute hierarchy of power. I watched out of the corner of my eye as Derek pulled out a chair for his wife, his hands visibly shaking. He kept checking his expensive watch, sweating profusely as the 24-hour deadline he had given me rapidly approached. Derek reached across the velvet cloth and poured himself a heavy glass of expensive amber whiskey from the table service, drinking it entirely too fast. He glared at me, holding the manila envelope containing the forged documents on his lap, like a protective shield. He honestly expected me to stand up, walk over to the microphone, and publicly resign at any moment to save myself from federal prison. But I simply sat there, sipping my sparkling water and enjoying a polite conversation with the mayor, who was seated to my left. The utter lack of panic on my face was driving Derek completely insane. He whispered aggressively to his mother, pointing under the table. Beatrice drank her own glass of wine, glaring at me with unhinged hatred. She simply could not handle the fact that the orphaned girl she had humiliated at the altar just days ago was now sitting covered in flawless diamonds, holding court with billionaires, while she was sitting at a secondary table facing complete financial ruin. The subtle tension in the room finally snapped. Beatrice pushed her chair back so violently it crashed into the waiter passing behind her. She did not apologize or even look at the poor man. Instead, she marched directly across the small gap separating our tables, her silver sequined dress catching the light. She completely ignored the mayor and the other powerful guests seated around us. She slammed both of her hands flat onto our table, rattling the crystal glasses and silverware. The polite conversation at our table stopped instantly. Guests from the surrounding tables turned their heads, their eyes widening at the sudden breach of high society etiquette. Beatrice leaned over the table, her face twisted into a mask of pure theatrical agony. She raised her voice intentionally, ensuring that dozens of the city's most elite citizens could hear every single word. "You think you can parade around here in stolen diamonds while you destroy my family?" Beatrice shouted, her voice echoing sharply. "You manipulated my son, you stole his work, and you ruined his wedding. I demand that you stand up right now and apologize to Derek in front of everyone in this room before I expose exactly what kind of trash you really are." The grand ballroom went completely silent as Beatrice's voice echoed across the velvet tables. Hundreds of wealthy, influential guests turned their attention toward our premier table. Beatrice breathed heavily, her silver sequined gown catching the light as she glared at me. She had successfully drawn a massive crowd. Politicians and investors watched with morbid curiosity, waiting to see how the new chief auditor would handle this explosive public confrontation. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting gracefully in my lap. I did not shrink back or look away. I maintained eye contact with the woman who tried to destroy my existence. Realizing she had the undivided attention of the room, Beatrice shifted her demeanor. The aggressive screaming stopped. She forced tears into her eyes, playing the heartbroken mother to perfection. She looked around at the wealthy crowd, pressing a hand to her chest. "Please, you have to understand," Beatrice cried out, projecting her voice so the mayor could hear. "We took this girl in when she had nothing. She was an orphan with no connections. We treated her like our own blood, and how did she repay us? She stole my son's life work. She used his computer to copy his brilliant predictive algorithms. Then she seduced the chief executive officer to get him fired and take his place. Derek is completely ruined because of this manipulative woman." The crowd began to murmur. It was a sensational story tailored perfectly for the elite class. Several guests looked at me with deep suspicion. Before I could respond, Monique gracefully stood up from her chair. She looked radiant in her crimson dress, holding a crystal flute of champagne. She took a slow sip and stepped next to Beatrice. "Oh, Beatrice," Monique said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I am glad you brought up stealing, because I have been confused all week, and I know you value absolute honesty." Monique turned to face the crowd, offering a polite smile before turning back to her mother-in-law. "You said Camille copied Derek's algorithm late at night. When I reviewed Derek's corporate expense reports, I noticed he billed the company for late-night dinners at expensive steakhouses on those exact same nights. Was Derek building a brilliant mathematical architecture, or was he eating expensive ribeyes on the company dime while Camille did his actual job?" Beatrice's face flushed a deep shade of crimson. She stammered, taking a step back. "That is none of your business," she hissed. "Derek works hard. He was entertaining important clients." Monique took another sip of her champagne, raising an eyebrow. "Really?" she asked, sounding genuinely surprised. "Because the receipts show those dinners were for 2 people, and the second person was not a client. It was the senator's daughter, the same woman he is currently married to. So he was cheating on Camille using corporate funds while Camille was sitting at home building the algorithm he claimed he wrote. That does not sound like a brilliant executive, Beatrice. That sounds like a lazy man who got caught." The murmurs in the crowd instantly shifted. The wealthy guests were looking at Beatrice with critical eyes. Beatrice panicked, waving her hands frantically. "You are lying!" she shrieked, her victim persona completely shattering. "You are just bitter because your husband is a failure. We supported this family. We paid for that massive wedding." Monique let out a soft, elegant laugh that cut through Beatrice's screaming like a sharp knife. "You paid for the wedding," Monique repeated, shaking her head. "Beatrice, you secretly forced my husband to take out a second mortgage on our family home to pay for your lavish lifestyle because you are entirely broke. You were thrown out of the Oakbridge Country Club just yesterday because your credit cards were completely declined and your membership dues were months behind. You do not have a single penny to your name, Beatrice. Camille funded that wedding with her own hard-earned savings. The same savings your son illegally transferred out of her account yesterday morning." The crowd gasped. The mayor seated to my left actually dropped his fork onto his porcelain plate. The absolute humiliation on Beatrice's face was magnificent to witness. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked around, desperately searching the crowd for a single friendly face, but the high society elite were looking at her with total disgust. She was a fraud exposed in front of the entire city. Suddenly, Derek pushed his way through the crowd. He stepped in front of his mother, trying to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation. He adjusted his tuxedo, looking at me with a sickeningly sweet smile. He was playing the role of the merciful savior, trying to look like the reasonable man calming 2 hysterical women. "That is enough," Derek said, raising his hands. "We do not need to air private family matters here. I understand you are hurt and lashing out, but we know the truth. I have documents proving you signed the intellectual property willingly." Derek patted the pocket of his tuxedo jacket. "I do not want you in federal prison. I am offering you one last chance. Walk to that microphone and publicly resign. Tell the truth, and I will forgive you. I will let you keep your freedom." The entire ballroom held its collective breath, waiting for my reaction. Derek stared at me. His eyes filled with desperate pleading, masked as arrogant confidence. He honestly thought the threat of those forged documents would break me right here. I stood up slowly, smoothing the silk of my midnight blue gown. I looked at Derek, then at Beatrice, and finally at Zane, who watched me with absolute pride. I picked up my crystal water glass and raised it slightly toward Derek in a silent, mocking toast. I did not speak a word to him. I simply looked up at the audiovisual control booth overlooking the ballroom and gave the technician a sharp nod. I kept my glass raised for a few seconds longer, allowing the silence of the grand ballroom to stretch into something incredibly uncomfortable. Derek stared at me, his arrogant smirk faltering as he realized I was not going to beg or negotiate. I lowered my glass, turning my attention to the front of the room. Above the velvet tables, the audiovisual technician sitting in the glass control booth caught my eye. He gave a tiny nod and pushed a slider on his soundboard. The heavy crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling dimmed, plunging the ballroom into a dramatic atmospheric twilight. A soft murmur washed over the wealthy guests. This was the scheduled time for the main event. Zane had announced that a highly produced documentary video about the Harrison Corporate Charity Foundation would be shown before the dessert course. Two massive high-definition projection screens smoothly descended from the ceiling, framing the main stage. The politicians and investors adjusted their chairs, turning their attention toward the front, expecting a heartwarming presentation about philanthropy and corporate generosity. Derek let out a heavy sigh of relief, believing my silent toast was an empty threat, and that the gala program was proceeding normally. He settled back into his chair, crossing his arms, putting on a fake expression of polite interest for the charity video. The massive screens glowed bright white, illuminating the faces of the audience. Soft, instrumental music began to play through the surround sound speakers. The Harrison corporate logo appeared on the screen for 3 seconds. Then the audio let out a harsh electronic screech. The pristine image shattered into a mosaic of digital static. Several guests jumped in their seats, startled by the sudden noise. The music cut out completely, replaced by the muffled background sounds of a crowded room and the clinking of glass. The digital static cleared, and a new image filled the two massive screens. It was not a highly produced charity documentary. It was raw, hidden camera footage taken from inside the corporate lounge located across the street from the Harrison building. The timestamp in the corner of the screen indicated the footage was recorded exactly 1 year ago. The camera angle was slightly tilted, but the picture was incredibly clear. Sitting in a leather booth holding a glass of bourbon was Derek. The ballroom gasped collectively as Derek's face filled the massive screens. In the video, Derek was wearing a loose tie, looking relaxed and slightly intoxicated. He was sitting across from a former junior executive who had been fired months ago. Derek leaned forward, resting his elbows on the wooden table, and laughed loudly. The audio was crystal clear, echoing across the silent ballroom so that every single politician and investor could hear every terrible word. "You just have to know how to manage your resources," Derek said in the video, taking a long sip of his bourbon. "And my best resource is Camille. She is absolutely brilliant with the numbers, but she is incredibly naive. She actually thinks we are building a life together." The junior executive in the video laughed, asking how Derek managed to get all his project deadlines met so quickly. "I do not do the work," Derek bragged, his voice dripping with supreme arrogance. "I just bring the files home and complain about how stressed I am. She stays up all night writing the predictive algorithms and building the architecture. She does all the heavy lifting, and I get all the credit from the board of directors. It is the perfect system. She is just a placeholder, man. As soon as I secure the vice president promotion and get my hands on that executive bonus, I am dumping her. I need a wife with actual social standing and political connections, not some orphaned foster kid who likes to play on a computer." The reality of his words hit the ballroom like a physical shockwave. The wealthy guests were absolutely paralyzed by the sheer cruelty displayed on the screen. The mayor seated to my left covered his mouth in total shock. I turned my head slightly to look at the table next to us. Derek's new wife, the politician's daughter who he had married strictly for her social standing, looked like she had just been stabbed in the chest. She stared at the screen, realizing that her entire marriage was a calculated business transaction. Beatrice sat completely frozen, her jaw dropping open as she watched her golden child happily confess to corporate fraud and emotional abuse on a 50-foot screen. Derek was sitting perfectly still, his face draining of all color. The manila envelope containing his forged documents slipped from his sweating hands and fell onto the carpeted floor. He had built his entire identity on lies, and now those lies were completely dismantled in front of the most powerful people in the city. The initial shock finally wore off, and raw panic completely consumed him. Derek jumped out of his chair, knocking his crystal wine glass onto the floor, where it shattered into a dozen pieces. "Cut it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking with absolute terror. He spun around, pointing frantically at the glass control booth located above the massive stage. "Cut the power right now!" Derek lunged forward, abandoning his table, sprinting toward the wooden doors leading to the audiovisual room. He intended to pull the wires from the machines to stop it. As he reached the carpeted staircase leading to the control booth, 4 security guards in black suits stepped out from the shadows. They formed an impenetrable wall of muscle blocking the double doors. Derek slammed into them, screaming and begging them to move, but they easily pushed him back down the stairs. Zane sat next to me, taking a calm sip of his water while watching the executive break down in defeat. The security guards did not move, and the hidden camera video continued to play loudly, echoing the destruction of his world. The massive projection screens above the main stage flickered again, casting a harsh white glow over the stunned faces of 500 wealthy guests. Derek was still struggling against the 4 massive security guards at the bottom of the carpeted staircase, screaming for someone to cut the power. But nobody moved to help him. The ballroom was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal they had just witnessed. Zane sat calmly beside me, his dark eyes fixed on the screens, waiting for the final blow. I took a slow breath, feeling the heavy diamond necklace resting against my collarbone. The first video had exposed Derek as a lazy manipulator who used me for my intellect. It had completely destroyed his professional reputation. But the second video was going to destroy his entire legal existence. The digital static cleared, and a new high-definition image filled the 2 massive screens. The new camera angle was positioned high up on a bookshelf cleverly hidden inside a decorative vase. I recognized the room immediately. It was the lavish living room of Beatrice's former estate, the same house she had secretly remortgaged and subsequently lost. The timestamp indicated the footage was recorded just 48 hours ago. This was the absolute masterpiece of espionage that Monique had provided. On the screen, Beatrice and Derek were sitting together on a plush white velvet sofa, sharing a bottle of incredibly expensive wine, celebrating their perceived victory. Beatrice was laughing so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes, holding her crystal glass in one hand and fanning herself with the other. Derek looked completely relaxed, his suit jacket thrown carelessly over a chair. The audio fed directly into the state-of-the-art surround sound system of the grand ballroom, ensuring that every single politician and executive heard the absolute truth. "I cannot believe she actually fell for it," Beatrice cackled on the massive screen, taking a long sip of her wine. The look on her face at the altar was absolutely priceless, Derek. "You played the perfect game." Derek chuckled deeply, reaching into his briefcase sitting on the glass coffee table. He pulled out the familiar thick manila envelope. "The game is not over until I get my promotion, Mother," Derek said, pulling out the intellectual property transfer documents. He held the forged papers up to the light, admiring them. "That guy you hired downtown did an absolutely brilliant job on her signature. You cannot even tell it is a forgery. It looks exactly like Camille's handwriting. If she tries to fight us for the algorithm, I will just hand this fake contract to the board of directors and let them destroy her." The collective gasp echoing through the grand ballroom was completely deafening. The wealthy guests were no longer witnessing a simple social scandal. They were watching a high-definition confession to multiple federal crimes. Forgery and grand fraud were serious felony offenses. The wealthy investors seated around the room began whispering frantically to their legal counsel, realizing they were currently in business with a dangerous criminal. Beatrice reached over and patted Derek's knee with a wicked smile. "Well, we had to play rough," she said on the screen. "Do you know how much the florist charged for your new wedding reception? It was an absolute fortune. Thank goodness you had the access codes to her personal bank accounts. Taking that $80,000 from her savings was the smartest thing you ever did. She practically paid for the wedding dress of the woman replacing her." Derek laughed again, a cold sound that made my stomach turn. "She was always so trusting," he said on the video. "She actually thought we were buying a house together. Now she is completely broke, crying in a cheap apartment, and I am about to be a vice president married to a politician's daughter. We took everything from her mother, and she does not even realize it yet." The video abruptly cut to black, leaving the ballroom in stunned silence. The cruelty displayed on those screens shattered any remaining illusions about Derek and his mother. They were not victims. They were predators who planned to ruin my life for financial gain. The silence was broken by a sharp gasp from the table next to ours. Derek's new wife, the daughter of the powerful state senator, stood up from her chair. Her face was completely drained of color, making her look like a ghost standing in the dim light of the chandeliers. She was trembling violently. She had married Derek believing he was a brilliant, wealthy executive. In less than 10 minutes, she learned that he was completely broke, a lazy fraud, and facing decades in federal prison. The senator himself stood up quickly from a nearby table, motioning frantically for his security detail to escort his daughter out of the room before the scandal could destroy their political family name. But she did not move toward the exit. She walked directly toward Derek, who was still pinned against the staircase by Zane's security guards. Derek looked up at his bride, his eyes wide with absolute panic. "Honey, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I can explain everything. It is a misunderstanding." She did not say a word. She reached down and violently pulled the diamond wedding ring off her finger. With a cry of absolute disgust, she threw the ring directly at his face. It struck his cheekbone, leaving a red mark before bouncing onto the floor and rolling away into the shadows. "I want an annulment by tomorrow morning," she screamed, her voice echoing across the silent room. "You are absolutely dead to me, Derek." She turned around and stormed out of the ballroom, followed closely by her furious father. Derek slumped heavily against the carpeted stairs, looking completely and utterly broken. The confession tape finally faded to black, leaving the two massive screens completely dark. The sudden silence in the grand ballroom was heavier than concrete. Derek stood frozen near the bottom of the carpeted staircase, staring at the blank screens. The absolute reality of his situation crashed down on him. He had just confessed to multiple federal crimes in front of 500 of the most powerful people in the country. His face turned an incredibly sickly shade of gray. The arrogant executive who had tormented me for months was completely gone. In his place was a terrified little boy, realizing he was about to lose his entire life. Derek spun around, looking wildly at the faces of the wealthy investors and politicians. Nobody offered him a sympathetic glance. They looked at him with absolute disgust and pure contempt. He was toxic waste, and nobody wanted to catch the fallout. Breathing heavily, Derek made a split-second decision. He turned away from Zane and his massive security guards and bolted directly toward the main entrance of the ballroom. He shoved his way through the crowd of wealthy guests, acting like a cornered animal. He bumped into a table, knocking over a tall crystal vase of white roses, sending water and glass crashing onto the expensive carpet. People gasped and pulled their velvet chairs back to get out of his way. Derek did not stop to apologize. He kept running, his expensive tuxedo jacket flapping behind him. He was sprinting toward the heavy double doors at the back of the room, genuinely believing he could just run away from the consequences of his actions. He reached out with both hands to push the heavy brass handles of the main exit, hoping to disappear into the dark city streets. But the heavy wooden doors swung open before he could even touch them. Stepping into the grand ballroom were 6 men and women wearing incredibly plain dark suits. They were not hotel security, and they were certainly not guests. They wore severe expressions and moved with absolute tactical precision. The lead agent, a tall man with graying hair, held up a leather badge case. Federal Bureau of Investigation. He announced, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the ballroom like a sharp knife. Derek slammed to a complete halt, his expensive leather shoes skidding on the polished marble floor near the exit. He stared at the silver badge catching the light from the crystal chandeliers above. He slowly took a step back, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. The agents quickly moved forward, forming a tight circle around him, completely cutting off any possible avenue of escape. While the federal agents secured Derek near the exit, Zane stood up from our table. He adjusted his suit jacket, perfectly calm, and walked slowly up the short staircase to the main stage. He did not look angry or surprised. He looked like a king restoring order to his kingdom. Zane stepped up to the microphone stand that was intended for his charity speech. He tapped the microphone once, ensuring it was live. The sharp sound echoed across the massive room, immediately drawing the attention of every single guest. "Ladies and gentlemen," Zane said, his deep voice radiating absolute authority and perfect control. "I deeply apologize for the dramatic shift in our evening program. As you can clearly see, we are currently dealing with a severe internal security matter regarding a former employee of the Harrison corporate empire." The crowd remained completely silent, hanging on to every single word Zane spoke. Harrison Corporation takes corporate espionage and financial fraud incredibly seriously. Zane continued, looking out over the sea of faces. "Earlier today, my brilliant chief auditor Camille uncovered a massive web of deceit orchestrated by Derek. We immediately handed all forensic evidence, including server logs, bank transfers, and audio recordings, over to the federal authorities. Harrison Corporation has officially pressed federal charges for grand embezzlement, intellectual property theft, and corporate fraud. We do not tolerate parasites in this company. We eradicate them." Zane looked directly at the federal agents standing at the back of the room and gave them a single sharp nod, indicating they should proceed with their duties. The lead agent grabbed Derek, twisting his arm roughly behind his back. Derek let out a loud, pathetic cry of pain as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked loudly around his wrists. The sharp metallic sound echoed across the silent ballroom. He was wearing a $10,000 tuxedo, and now he was wearing federal chains. "You cannot do this!" Derek sobbed, tears streaming down his face as the agents patted him down. "I am a vice president. I am supposed to be a vice president." The agent ignored his crying completely, reading him his rights in a flat, monotonous tone. The wealthy guests watched the incredible spectacle in absolute awe. Several people even pulled out their phones to record the humiliating downfall of the man who thought he could steal his way to the very top of high society. The federal agents forcefully marched Derek down the center aisle, past the tables of the investors he had tried to impress. As he walked past our table, he locked eyes with me. His face was a messy mixture of tears and absolute terror. He silently pleaded with me, begging me to stop them, but I simply offered him a cold, blank stare. With Derek gone, the entire focus of the room suddenly shifted to Beatrice. She let out a loud, guttural sob and stood up from her chair. Beatrice stumbled away from her table and collapsed right down to her knees in front of me and Zane. "Please, Camille," Beatrice cried. "I will give you all the money back if you just let him go. I will return every single penny we stole from your accounts. You cannot let him rot in a prison cell. Please show us some true mercy right now." The heavy double doors of the ballroom closed firmly behind the federal agents, taking Derek away forever. Flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers outside reflected brightly through the massive glass windows, indicating the permanent end of his career. Inside, the silence was completely suffocating. Every guest remained frozen, staring at the space where the arrogant executive had just been hauled away in heavy steel handcuffs. The silence was finally broken by the loud, desperate sobbing of Beatrice. She was kneeling on the carpet at the edge of the stage. Her silver sequined gown was crumpled, and her hair fell across her tear-stained face. She looked completely broken. "Please, Camille," she begged, clasping her hands together in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Tell them to stop. Tell them it was a mistake. I will give you everything back. I swear I will return every penny my son took from your savings accounts. Tell Mr. Harrison to drop the charges." I stood quietly on the edge of the large stage looking down at the terrible woman who had made my life a living hell. She was not crying out of guilt. She was crying because she had finally been caught. I walked down the staircase, my midnight blue gown gliding over the steps. I stopped a few feet away from where she knelt on the floor. I did not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. I looked down at her with eyes as cold as winter ice. "You cannot return the money, Beatrice," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "There is no money left to ever return. He spent my life savings paying for the lavish reception you demanded and expensive gifts for his new wife. What money he had left has now been permanently seized by the federal government as evidence of his fraud. You have absolutely nothing left to bargain with." Beatrice shook her head violently, refusing to accept the harsh reality of her complete financial ruin. "That is absolutely not true," she cried out, tears streaming down her neck. "We have massive assets. We have the family estate. I have my stock portfolios and my expensive jewelry collection. I will sell the mansion tomorrow morning and give you a check for the full amount. Just make them bring my son back to me right now." A confident set of footsteps echoed across the marble floor. It was Monique, looking regal in her crimson dress. She walked over from our table with the clinical detachment of a woman taking out the trash. Monique stopped right next to me, holding a stack of legal documents in her hand. She looked down at her mother-in-law, offering a merciless smile. "You are not going to sell anything, Beatrice," Monique said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "You do not own a mansion anymore, and your jewelry collection is going to be auctioned off by the bankruptcy court." Beatrice stopped crying, staring up at Monique in sheer confusion. "What are you talking about?" Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling with a new wave of terror. "I own my home." Monique let out a short, bitter laugh. "You owned your home until you forced your oldest son to take out a secret second mortgage to pay for your fake billionaire lifestyle," Monique corrected her smoothly. When Camille flagged Derek's accounts for corporate embezzlement this afternoon, it triggered an automated alert across the entire banking network. The federal authorities immediately began investigating every transaction tied to your family name. They found the fraudulent loan applications. Because your accounts are tied to a federal fraud investigation, the bank invoked the criminal activity clauses in your mortgage contract. They called in the massive debt. Monique took a step closer, dropping the stack of legal documents directly onto the carpet right in front of Beatrice's knees. "Those are expedited foreclosure papers," Monique said, her tone completely devoid of any human mercy. "The massive bank seized your estate exactly 20 minutes ago. The local authorities have already changed the heavy locks on the iron gates. You cannot even go back there tonight to pack your expensive designer bags or collect your clothes. You are completely homeless, Beatrice. You selfishly tried to destroy Camille's life, just so you could pretend to be wealthy. Now you get to experience what it truly feels like to have absolutely nothing." Beatrice stared down at the bold black letters on the legal documents. Her hands shook violently as she reached out to touch the cold papers, realizing that every single word Monique just said was the absolute, undeniable truth. She had completely lost her golden child to a federal prison, and she had lost her historic mansion to the bank. She was completely destitute. Beatrice let out a loud, agonizing scream of pure defeat and utter despair that echoed through the entire room. She collapsed completely onto the floor of the grand ballroom, clawing at the expensive carpet with her manicured fingernails. She wailed loudly, begging anyone in the room to help her, begging her wealthy friends to offer her a warm place to stay just for tonight. But the absolute worst punishment was the immediate reaction of the high society crowd. The wealthy politicians, the powerful investors, and the elite socialites she had spent her entire life trying to impress did not rush forward to comfort her. They did not offer her money or a warm bed. Instead, they collectively took a huge step back. Women in expensive gowns turned their heads away in total disgust. Men in tailored tuxedos quietly signaled for their coats. The mayor physically turned his back on her, refusing to even look in her direction. They completely excommunicated her from their circles without saying a single word. Beatrice was left screaming and sobbing alone on the floor, a completely ruined woman, surrounded by a wall of turned backs, while I simply turned around and walked away to enjoy my evening. 3 weeks had passed since the Harrison annual charity gala, and the dust had finally settled over the absolute destruction of my former life. The city was still buzzing with the scandalous gossip of that incredible night, but for me the chaos had been replaced by a profound and peaceful silence. The crisp autumn air blew through the city streets, signaling a permanent change in my destiny. Derek was currently sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting his criminal trial. The federal judge had denied his request for bail, citing him as an extreme flight risk due to the massive scale of his corporate embezzlement. His expensive tailored suits had been permanently replaced by a standard orange jumpsuit. His new wealthy wife had officially annulled their marriage less than 48 hours after the gala, completely erasing him from her powerful family history. I heard through the legal grapevine that Derek spent his days sitting in his concrete cell, frantically trying to call his former corporate friends, begging them to pay for a defense attorney. But his phone calls were constantly ignored. The man who had once believed he was an untouchable genius was now entirely isolated, left to face the crushing reality of a 20-year federal prison sentence with absolutely no allies to his name. His mother was not faring much better. Beatrice, the woman who had proudly poured red wine over my wedding dress to protect her fake aristocratic image, was now living in a cheap roadside motel on the outskirts of the city. After the massive bank officially foreclosed on her sprawling historic estate, she had nowhere else to go. Her collection of designer bags and expensive jewelry had been completely seized and auctioned off by the bankruptcy courts to pay back the secret debts she owed. She had desperately tried to reach out to the wealthy women from her exclusive country club, hoping they would offer her a guest house or a small loan to get back on her feet. But high society is incredibly unforgiving to those who are exposed as frauds. Her phone calls went straight to voicemail. Her emails were completely ignored. The wealthy friends she had spent decades trying to impress had entirely erased her from their social circles, as if she had never existed. Beatrice was now forced to clip coupons and eat cheap microwave dinners in a tiny motel room, completely stripped of the wealth and toxic pride that had defined her existence. She had built her life on a foundation of lies and judging others, and now she was suffocating under the weight of her own ruin. I sat at my massive mahogany desk in my glass-walled corner office at the Harrison corporate tower, looking out over the magnificent city skyline. The morning sun illuminated the busy streets below, filling the room with warm golden light. My personal lawyer sat across from me, sliding a thick stack of final legal documents across the polished wooden surface. I picked up my gold pen and signed my name with absolute confidence. The court had officially finalized the recovery of my stolen funds. Not only had the federal government returned the $80,000 Derek had illegally transferred out of my savings account, but the judge had also awarded me substantial financial damages for the emotional distress and the extreme intellectual property theft. I watched the numbers in my personal banking portal update in real time, reflecting a balance that guaranteed I would never have to worry about financial security again. I had systematically dismantled the toxic family that tried to break me, leaving them with absolutely nothing while I walked away with everything I rightfully deserved. I handed the signed documents back to my lawyer, establishing a permanent legal boundary. A strict no-contact order was now in place, ensuring Derek and Beatrice could never approach me again. The nightmare was officially over. Just as my lawyer packed his briefcase and left the office, my door opened and Monique walked in. She looked absolutely radiant, wearing a sharp, white, tailored suit that perfectly complemented her beautiful dark skin. She carried 2 crystal glasses and a bottle of incredibly expensive vintage champagne. Her divorce from Derek's older brother had been finalized that very morning. Like me, she had completely severed the dead weight of that toxic family and secured her own brilliant future. She walked over to my desk, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, and set the glasses down. Monique smiled, her eyes sparkling with genuine happiness and absolute triumph. "We did it, Camille," she said smoothly. pouring the bubbling golden liquid into the crystal glasses. We actually did it. We burned their toxic little empire straight to the ground, and we walked out of the ashes looking better than ever. I stood up from my leather chair and picked up my glass, walking around the desk to stand next to her. We looked out through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city move below us in the bright afternoon sunlight. We had started out as two women completely underestimated and betrayed by the greedy men we once trusted. But instead of breaking down under the extreme pressure we had, formed an absolutely unstoppable alliance. I raised my crystal glass toward the beautiful city skyline, feeling a profound sense of absolute freedom washing over my entire soul. To setting permanent boundaries, I said, my voice incredibly steady and clear. To knowing our true worth and never letting anyone treat us like disposable placeholders ever again. Monique raised her glass, clinking it gently against mine. To absolute financial independence, she agreed with a brilliant smile. We both took a slow sip of the perfectly chilled champagne, savoring the incredibly sweet taste of total victory and the quiet peace of our brand new lives. The toxic shadows of the terrible past were finally completely gone forever, leaving us as the sole authors of our magnificent shared destiny. 1 month later, the entire world looked completely different from the top floor of the Harrison corporate tower. I sat quietly behind a massive desk crafted from solid dark mahogany, feeling the incredibly soft leather of my executive chair fully supporting my back. The clear glass walls of my corner office offered an absolutely unobstructed panoramic view of the vast city skyline. The bright morning sunlight poured through the tall floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a very warm golden glow over the large stacks of vital financial documents neatly arranged in front of me. I was no longer hiding away in a small cramped cubicle, crunching tedious numbers for ungrateful middle managers. I was no longer the quiet, timid girl who allowed herself to be constantly pushed into the dark shadows by arrogant people. I was now the official chief auditor and a highly respected senior partner at one of the most powerful and influential venture capital firms in the entire country. The professional transition over the last 4 weeks had been incredibly intense, but it was also absolutely exhilarating. The elite corporate board of directors who had once looked at me with deep suspicion now treated me with absolute professional reverence. I had successfully and completely purged the entire company of Derek's toxic, lingering influence, and I had entirely streamlined our complex financial architecture, saving the prestigious firm tens of millions of dollars in the rapid process. I slowly picked up my heavy gold fountain pen and confidently signed my name at the very bottom of a massive legal contract. It was a highly lucrative billion-dollar international merger acquisition that I had personally vetted, scrutinized, and finally approved. My signature was no longer something trivial to be easily forged or stolen by greedy, desperate men hiding in parking garages. My signature was now the ultimate defining authority that moved global financial markets and dictated the prosperous future of entire global industries. The heavy, solid wooden door to my private office opened very quietly. I looked up from my desk, fully expecting to see my new executive assistant bringing me the daily briefing. But it was Zane Harrison. He was wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, looking just as incredibly sharp and formidable as the day he first walked down that church aisle to save me from complete public humiliation. But the cold, ruthless exterior he always showed the rest of the corporate world was completely gone when he looked directly at me. He held 2 steaming ceramic cups of fresh coffee, walking casually across the plush carpet of my office. He set 1 warm cup down on my desk right next to the billion-dollar merger documents, offering me a genuinely warm smile. I thought the newest senior partner might need a little extra caffeine to finally finalize the massive European acquisition. Zane said, his deep voice sounding incredibly rich and very warm in the quiet room. I leaned back comfortably in my executive chair, picking up the coffee. "Thank you, Zane," I replied, taking a slow, careful sip of the hot drink. "The financial numbers on the European deal are absolutely solid and completely verified. We are fully ready to close the acquisition by Friday afternoon." Zane walked slowly around the large mahogany desk and leaned casually against the polished edge, crossing his strong arms as he looked out the massive glass windows. He did not look at me like a demanding boss checking on a subordinate employee. He looked at me with profound mutual respect and genuine human admiration. The strict ironclad prenup we signed was originally supposed to be just a temporary business arrangement to satisfy the nervous board of directors, he said softly, looking out at the bustling city far below us. But I have to admit, Camille bringing you into this powerful company was the single greatest executive decision I have ever made in my entire life. You did not just save my firm from a massive catastrophic financial disaster, you completely elevated it to a brand new level of total market dominance. I stood up slowly from my leather chair and walked over to stand right next to him. The faint reflections of the towering city buildings mirrored perfectly in the clean glass right in front of us. We had started this incredible journey as two complete strangers making a desperate sudden alliance, but we had successfully forged something incredibly real and deeply powerful in the intense fires of that ongoing conflict. We were equal partners in every single sense of the word. I looked up at him clearly, seeing the genuine care and deep affection shining in his dark eyes. I think we make a pretty incredible team, Zane, I said, smiling softly at the billionaire standing beside me. He returned the warm smile, reaching out gently to carefully tuck a loose stray lock of dark hair behind my ear. We absolutely do, Camille, he agreed, his voice dropping to a very gentle whisper. And whenever you feel truly ready to finally tear up that temporary legal prenup and draft something far more permanent together, you just let me know. I felt a wonderful, warm rush of genuine affection completely fill my chest. There was absolutely no pressure and no toxic manipulation between us. There was just mutual respect and the beautiful promise of a brilliant shared future. Zane gave my shoulder a very gentle, encouraging squeeze and walked slowly back toward the solid wooden door, leaving me alone to finish my morning review. I turned back to face the massive glass windows, looking out over the endlessly sprawling city below. Millions of busy people were rushing rapidly through the crowded concrete streets, living their complex lives and fighting their own difficult personal battles. Just 30 days ago, I was exactly one of them, entirely broken and weeping, standing at a church altar covered in cheap, sticky red wine, while the toxic people I trusted most laughed cruelly at my deep emotional pain. Derek and Beatrice had looked at me and seen a very convenient disposable stepping stone. They saw an isolated orphan they could easily discard once they had selfishly extracted everything of financial value from my life. Beatrice had publicly called me a worthless placeholder in front of hundreds of people. She honestly thought I was just a temporary quick fix until someone much better and wealthier came along to take my spot. But they both deeply underestimated the absolute fierce strength it truly takes to survive in this harsh, unforgiving world when you have nobody else to rely on but your own brilliant mind. I pressed my open hand flat against the cool, smooth glass of the window, taking a very slow, deep breath of the perfectly conditioned office air. I realized in that quiet, profound moment that true revenge is not just about ruthlessly destroying the terrible people who deeply hurt you. True, meaningful revenge is about completely reclaiming your own stolen narrative and rewriting the ending. It is about taking the terrible, painful things toxic people have done to you and transforming them into the raw materials required to build an impenetrable fortress of absolute personal independence. I had completely stopped waiting for someone else to finally give me a small seat at their table, and I had simply bought the entire building instead. I looked at the incredible corporate empire completely surrounding me and the brilliant, limitless future stretching out endlessly ahead. I smiled, knowing my true value. I was absolutely nobody's stepping stone. I was nobody's tragic victim, and I would never be a temporary placeholder ever again. The incredible story of Camille reminds us that our true worth is never defined by the toxic people who try to use us or tear us down. Often, the individuals who belittle your achievements or make you feel like a temporary placeholder are simply projecting their own deep insecurities and total lack of substance. When faced with absolute betrayal from those you trusted most, it is incredibly easy to internalize their cruelty and question your own value. However, the greatest revenge you can ever achieve is not found in screaming matches or public arguments. True justice is found in absolute silence, strategic planning, and unshakable self-belief. By refusing to break under the extreme pressure of public humiliation, Camille used her brilliant intelligence to completely dismantle the toxic environment that was suffocating her. She transformed her absolute lowest moment into a powerful launching pad for total independence. You must always remember that you possess unique talents and a brilliant mind that nobody can ever steal from you. When toxic people try to push you out of the picture, use that exact moment to build your own empire where you are the sole decision maker. Never allow anyone to convince you that you are merely a stepping stone for their selfish success. You are the main character of your own incredible journey. If this powerful story of reclaiming your worth and building your own empire resonated with you today, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of resilience and ultimate revenge. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic environment and rebuild your life entirely on your own terms? Tell us exactly how you found your strength in the comments section below. Share this video with anyone who needs a strong reminder of their own incredible power today. Stay strong, know your absolute worth, and we will see you in the next story.